Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for giving up 45 minutes of your time on this really incredibly hot Thursday afternoon. The session should last roughly 35 to 40 minutes. So we're going to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. I'm going to cover the main aspects of the research and some of the learnings for you to take away. So hopefully there'll be some interesting stuff in here for you. And you can all hear and see me all right. I'm just sort of looking at the chat, see if there's anything coming in, any issues at all. As I mentioned, if you have any issues with connectivity or sound, obviously if you have an issue with sound, you can't hear me now. But if you do have any problems, then please fire a note into the chat and one of the guys will come and help you out. So welcome to the webinar. So I'm just going to move through to the slide just to give you a bit of background about myself. So my name's Ben. I'm the director and co-founder of Rare Consulting, and we're a customer insights consultancy. My background's in customer research. I've worked a little bit brand side, quite a lot in agency world and in market research. And my areas of expertise, I suppose, are in consumer behaviour, brand loyalty, and quite a bit in respect of training and helping businesses transform into action. So on the right hand side, it's a bit like I don't know, is it like showing off? I don't know. Here are a load of brands anyway that I've worked with in the past. Some of them are current clients of Rare's as well. So bit of a mix there. In terms of about Rare as a business, I'm not going to bore you with this. So if you want to find out anything else, then please give us a shout after the end of the session or go online. Not now though, because I'm about to go through the results. So hopefully, hopefully we can keep your attention. But we're a customer insights consultancy that helps businesses create insights with research, and then we spring them into action with strategy and training. So they're the sort of three main areas that we help businesses on. I'm not going to go into any detail really there, because obviously we're all here to go through the research that we conducted earlier this year. All right, so going to move through then, just talk about what you can expect from the webinar. So here we go. Hopefully you can see that. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, then we're going to just have a brief overview as to why is loyalty important. Obviously, if you've come to the webinar, you've probably got experience in it or an interest in it. So we're just going to reframe that discussion before we go into what the research really means, and to give it some context and really show the importance of what we found. So I'm sure none of that will be new to you, but hopefully some of the research insights will be. So hopefully there'll be a new way of thinking at the end of the session. Then we're going to go through and talk about how we define customer loyalty and compare how the marketing industry thinks about it and how customers think about it. And we're going to have some polls at this point as well, just so you're not nodding off in the heat, or you haven't, run out for a cup of tea or a ice cream or whatever it is. Maybe go to the beer garden. We've got some polls in there, so we've got some kind of live comparison with your own thoughts and feelings on the topics compared to customers that we interviewed. Then we're going to have a look at then we're also going to have a look at some of the drivers of customer loyalty. So what really makes people to be loyal to brands in the first place? What are the most important aspects? And then we're going to go through some lessons that people have learned from the high street. I've got a couple of messages here. Esther, I think, is having some issues with sound. If you're having issues with sound, our guys will get in touch and hopefully help you out if you have any problems. But obviously, if you do, please do get in touch. Brilliant. All right, so moving on through the session then, just to give you a bit of context in terms of the research. So May this year, we interviewed 1,071 people on the high street and asked them, what does brand loyalty mean to you? And what's important to you when you think about brand loyalty? So we really wanted to understand what drives loyalty membership, how loyalty programs can engender true loyalty, and what are the true motivational drivers behind loyalty to one brand over another, for example. And then we augmented some of the research with some interviews with our friends at Virgin Red, Google Zoo, PA Consulting, and the Academy of Digital Business Leaders. So there's a lot of interesting kind of, should we say, thinking or insight or industry expertise that went into the research as well. So hopefully there's a bit of a nice rounded view in terms of the perspective there. All right, moving through to the next slide. So, as I mentioned, we're gonna start the session by having a conversation on why is loyalty important in the first place. So, I think this diagram neatly depicts some of the pain points that marketing departments often see, is that it costs so much more to acquire new people into the business. It's so much more difficult to attract new customers, to identify where they are, what motivates them, what makes them tick, etc. And in the multi-channel world we see these days, it just becomes even more complex. I'm not sure if any of you've been playing Pokemon Go recently, but there's a lot of narrative about how that approach taken by Nintendo is perhaps a blueprint for the future of marketing communications. It's funny how marketers always jump on these opportunities, but whether or not it will remains to be seen, I suppose. I'm sure at the end of it, there's the core fundamentals still play a huge role in terms of our relationship with brands over and above the use of technology, which we'll go through today. But certainly, there's so much data to support the notion that loyalty is so important. So some research by Bain conducted a couple of years ago showed that just a 5% increase in retention can increase your profit by as high as 95%. So go show that the topic of loyalty is vitally important. And when you think about spend within the sector as well, we spend so much more in our industry on acquiring new people. So £500 billion spent in 2014 in just advertising alone to acquire people into the funnel, into your pipeline, into your customer journey, whatever you call it. But only £9 billion spent. I mean, only £9 billion. I wish I had that in my pocket, but clearly I don't. But £9 million spent on customer service. It shows there is a real difference in terms of where budgets are aligned to, in terms of acquiring and maintaining relationships with our customers. Okay, so I'm just going to move through to the next slide. I've just understood there's a couple of issues with sound. Obviously, we will do our best to kind of solve that if you are having issues, but I'll crack on regardless for those of you that can hear it. So we understand loyalty is important, not just in terms of the savings it can necessarily bring, or better understanding in terms of what customers want. It's also beneficial to us in terms of understanding why our brand is so important, why people love us so much, with the rich data that we get from it. But loyalty is also important and going to be increasingly important in the current context, given that what's recently happened with Brexit means that we're going to start to see a great deal of uncertainty in the market, with increased inflation of everyday household goods, and which will suppress customer spending, and people behave in ways that perhaps we didn't expect. Post the last recession in 2008, it was quite interesting to see how people's purchase habits change. So you're likely to see people maybe going on what you call a staycation, so less likely to go abroad on holiday, or they might be sort of trading down on some luxury goods to everyday treats. So there was an interesting pattern observed around 2008, that there was an increase in coffee sales, and it was equated to people were actually sort of down, giving themselves a little bit of a treat every day. So rather than sort of spending 400 quid on a new PS4 or whatever it might well be, you might be treating yourself every day to smaller items of a lower value, but obviously incrementally these things add up over time. So what we are certainly going to see with Brexit, with all this uncertainty, is a real change in customer behaviour, which means that, of course, research becomes more important. And I think the topic what we're going to go into, and the research what we present from the next few slides onwards, will certainly help us understand the importance to really sort of get a sense of how people really feel at this particular point in time, and how we can create products and services and brand experiences that add much more to their lives. Enough of the buzz terms there. I'm going to move through then to again the kind of context of the question itself. So we've established that loyalty is important, and if loyalty is so important, then how come there's so many unused points on the high street? So this is some research done by This Is Money in 2015 that showed there are 4.5 billion unused pounds as points on the UK high street. That's all wrapped up in loyalty schemes, which is an absolutely astronomical amount. I mean, imagine how many swimming pools you could build with that, how many aeroplanes you could build. Well, I should probably think of examples that are maybe a little bit more, should we say, socially aware, not just luxury items, but you certainly get a sense of the scale of this. It's obviously this does kind of lead to the question then, do loyalty schemes, are they currently creating a degree of apathy amongst people? Are people not that interested in them anymore? 15, 20 years or so ago, they were, very much sort of the exciting, new, fresh way of thinking to retain audiences, certainly around the time that Club Card was released. But we can start to see that maybe over time, consumers are getting a little bit bored of this topic. So we led with this question then, if true loyalty exists, then why are there so many unused points on the high street? And I'm going to start to go into some of the detail of the research itself. And we asked loyalty scheme members whether they would still be members of the programs that they're currently with, whether those will stay with those brands, whether those loyalty schemes would exist or not. And 65% of loyalty scheme members would still shop with a brand if the loyalty program no longer existed. So, what does that mean? Well, it means that for only 35% does the loyalty scheme necessarily add value to their experience every day. So for a whole swathe of people, it isn't necessarily adding any value or enticing them to stay with a brand any longer. So perhaps we're not necessarily thinking of loyalty in the right kind of terms. We think about these things very much behaviorally with metrics such as average order value, customer lifetime value, all those metrics you would probably be using in the back end of your CRM systems. But have we really thought about the attitudinal benefits? Have we really thought about how people feel about the experiences that we're giving to them? And I think it really comes down to, in many ways, the definitions that we have for loyalty within the industry itself. And so in the next part, we're going to demonstrate how there is maybe a little bit of a difference in the way that brands and marketeers think about loyalty compared to consumers themselves, which I think yields and shows a little bit of a gap in terms of the thinking. So I'm going to flip to a poll. Hopefully technology will fare me well. Wish me luck. Hopefully this should work. Wait a second. So you should just see a poll here. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to fill out which of the following definitions, in your view, best describes customer loyalty. While you're doing that, I'm just going to have a little sip of tea. So 15% of you voted, 23% of you voted. We're getting there. Oh, most of you voted now. Any more for any more? I'm going to close it. Oh, a couple more. Okay. Oh wow, 92% voted. That's pretty high, isn't it? Imagine if you got that turnout at the general election. We'd be pretty happy about that, wouldn't we, if we were observing that? Okay, close the poll. So hopefully you're going to share the results. Should be able to see that. So that's interesting to see then that 52%, the majority of you voted on that. Sort of in terms of a positive attitude between brand and consumer that drives the purchase. Then the next score was 28% of you saying it's repeatedly buying from the same brand, 12% on convincing customers to love your brand over and over again, just convincing them, come on, just keep coming back. And then 8% talking about it's a strong feeling of support or allegiance. So interesting that majority of you are defining it in terms of attitudinal and behavioural aspects. So that's interesting. So how does that compare then to? I'm going to talk about the sort of the general ways that we often define loyalty. And what's interesting with the quotes that you saw there are actually quotes we've taken from clients in workshops and training sessions. So it's interesting to see from marketers' perspective how we define loyalty. But generally, we tend to view these things behaviourally. So we talk about repeat patronage, repeat purchase, and the propensity to come back. And we can also look at loyalty in terms of the attitudinal behavioural component. So how does that positive attitude towards something create a behaviour that you want to entice? And our perspective is it's really, we spend quite a lot, I think, in the industry focusing on the left-hand side of the puzzle, but we don't really sort of think about the right so much. So when we talk with clients about what do they want from loyalty, what does loyalty mean to them, it's not very often you tend to hear them be able to talk about the attitudes they want to create and the behaviours that come out as a result of that. It tends to almost sort of see people as robots walking in and out of a store with no real thought or consideration. So it's interesting as marketers how we maybe have got wrapped up in our own kind of language and way of thinking things. It's a little bit different to how it looks for consumers. So I'm going to just show you what loyalty means from a customer's perspective, and I think it's really interesting. This is one of the most important elements of the research that we found. And that from a customer's perspective, when we asked 1,071 people, what does brand loyalty mean to you? 1 in 5 people defined it in the notions of trust. And this was an open box question, so they can kind of write it in their own terms, and we coded up their responses. But 20% of all those that responded used it in terms of trust. And it's really interesting, isn't it? You know, what does trust mean? What's that all about? It's the dog that doesn't leave your side. It's your friends and family who've all got the same shared values and beliefs and kind of value systems that you all kind of pull together on. 16% of people felt that brand loyalty was about being rewarded. And what was interesting with the responses that we saw was that being rewarded wasn't necessarily that you're going to get money off or you're going to get some kind of explicit benefit in terms of monetary value. Being rewarded was kind of richer in the language that people use, and I'll show you some examples of the sentiment that we got from people. So I'm going to throw it into the question. Does anyone got any thoughts at this point? Is this surprising at all to you? If you feel like contributing at any point, just throw it into the chat. If any of you got any kind of thoughts at this point. But in the interest of time, I will move on to showing you some examples of the quotes that we're starting to see. So bear me 1 second. So when we asked them what does loyalty mean to you, these were the types of quotes that we were getting back from people, and they're really, when you look at the quotes, they're really steeped, I think, in quite rich emotive language. So what does brand loyalty mean to you, Mr. Customer? Well, it's a faith to use only certain types of products. It's that the company listens to the community and provides accordingly. It's that you're treated like a person, not a number. It's rewarded for being loyal. It's a consistently high quality. I have positive feelings towards the brand. So when you read left to right, when you pick up on the words that people use, they are quite emotive in the way that they're using it. They're not simply saying, "Oh, I get money off, mate. I just get a better deal, don't I? Better bargain." It's not the case. People are after so much more, much more than that. So it's a really interesting kind of insight that we got from customers here for sure. A couple of questions, observations there from some of you. So how about the over 40%? It's the question that's come through. So I believe this question from Julian. So in terms of the data we've just seen, whether there's anyone who had over, it'd be good to get your just get clarification on that question, Julian. We have cut by the different age groups. I can provide you this data view by different ages if that's of interest. But moving through the presentation, we've got some really interesting insights about what drives loyalty across the generations, and it's quite different. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions as we get there. Okay, going to keep moving. Any questions as I move? I'll attempt to answer as many questions as I move through. It's great that so many are coming through, so thanks, keep them coming. I'll do my best to answer some of the questions at the end of the session so I can get through the majority of the content, because I imagine it's quite warm where you are. I don't want to keep you too long. So we've understood that loyalty is important. We've understood that from the definition of loyalty can differ to some extent between how we think about it in the world of marketing and how consumers view it as well. For consumers' perspective, they're most likely to use the language of trust and to view trust as being one of the most important aspects to defining customer loyalty. But when we look across the notion of trust across generations, it really differs. So just if you pay attention to the blue line, this is identifying the extent to which people across the generations agree that they can trust information they receive from brands they know. What you'll observe is that it's quite low across the total population. Around 3 in 10 people would agree that they can trust information from the brands they know. And what's interesting is observing the trended line across the generations. So we're seeing that younger people are perhaps more likely to trust information they receive from brands from older generations. Now, whether that's necessarily correlated to life stage, we don't have the insight on that, but perhaps our kind of hypothesis here is that it's probably more related to the availability and use of digital touch points across generations and how younger people have grown up with technology and the reciprocated relationship between data exchange and personalized services, which we'll go on to in a bit more detail. But what is quite curious and has been supported by research over time is how, as people get older, they're more likely to trust other people, which is quite curious. So if you look at Generation K, 29% of people would agree that most people can be trusted, to 59% for baby boomers, which is a really fascinating finding and has been backed up by a large study in South Africa of 197,000 people worldwide. And it's been shown there is a correlation. So as you get older, you're more likely to trust. Which now I instantly think about those TV shows on Channel 4 with grumpy old men and how they don't like anything. Now, but what is interesting though is that when we talk about trust in the context of loyalty, it's not a fixed construct, and it will change as we move throughout life stage. Is this something that anyone sort of found surprising at all? Just going to look in the chat. Any thoughts at this point? It's interesting to look across the generations. We've got a couple of other examples as we move through, but certainly goes to show the notion of trust isn't a fixed construct. And to add further weight to the argument that loyalty is very much bound in terms of trust, in terms of more of emotive drivers that we don't necessarily think about day to day as marketeers, we ask people to name a brand that they would always buy from if given a choice. And these are the top brands that they mentioned. So Amazon, Heinz, Samsung, Apple, Tesco, things you would expect. And 92% of people agreed that these brands that they would always buy from if given a choice, also their favorite brands. Which goes to show that there's that bond between the customer and the brand often does yield that long-term relationship, that continuous choice to buy from it. Which is interesting. Often I find when we're working with clients that get quite interested in this idea about how can we convince them to come back in, there's not often a recognition that it's all there are softer metrics to consider. So brand favorability, likability. You might be using NPS. You might have other mechanisms at play to help understand the extent to which people feel favorable towards you. But I think that needs probably within the industry a better correlation of how those metrics actually drive behaviour and the relationship that exists there. So going to move on to the next section then. So we've looked at how customers define loyalty in their own terms, and as I said, probably the third time now, there's an interesting distinction to be made between how we see it in the world of marketing, how it's seen on the high street. But thinking back, what really drives people to be loyal in the first place? So I'm going to throw this open to another poll. So if you're nodding off, it's time to wake up. So I'm going to open it up to a poll to ask you, what do you think actually is most effective at driving brand loyalty? And then when I've got the results, I'm going to show you some of the findings we had from our customer set of 1,071 people. Hopefully you can see that. So fingers on buttons, get voting. So we've got around the half of you responded. Getting there, 67%. Any more? Round up. 80, 89, 93. Well, that's good watch. It's quite nerdy watching this. Great. Well, 93%. So sounds like maybe a couple of people unable to get engaged with the poll. So that's great. I'm going to close it and share the results with you. Really interesting to see them. So the majority of people feel that the ability to deliver on its promise, so the extent to which that proposition is set and is consistent, is agreed by 60% of you. So the majority see it in that way. 20% for it delivers offers a service that's personalised to me. They're the top two choices, and there's a couple of other metrics down the bottom there as well. So I'm going to move on and show you what customers say about it, and it's interesting because there's actually quite a lot of overlap with what you guys have said and customers, and it's interesting actually. Having done this webinar a couple of times, we got completely different results than the last one. So yours, I would say, are a little bit more aligned to how customers view it. So when we ask customers, what drives their loyalty, so what really entices them to be loyal to a brand that they're most favourable towards, likability, delivering on its promise, quality of service, and ease of use were the top drivers, which I feel is probably no surprise there when we think about it. So it demonstrates, of course, that it's not just about the fact that I get better offers, that it's convenient. It's much more than that. I just happen to like it, and it delivers on its promise, and I can trust it, and it's consistent, and I know what I'm going to get. And it's good to see those kind of core metrics really come out of the fore. And we spend so much of our time thinking about how we can digitize our offering, how we can use technology to create behaviors. But I think what this really does show is that, again, those drivers to a product or service are really, again, steeped in this notion of trust. It's the fact that I like it. It's something I can kind of connect with. Something that makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I don't know why. It just does. I can trust it, in its guise. And what's quite curious, I think, is this notion of personalization. So if you look down towards the bottom of the chart, 48%, so roughly 1 in 2 people agree that that personalization is one of the most important drivers to them. But it's interesting when you look across the different generations and how it changes, because again, much like the notion of trust, the notion of personalization actually varies across generations, as you might well expect. You've probably seen a lot of it written in the marketing press recently. But looking across Generation K on your left, all the way through to baby boomers on the right at the bottom, so the blue to yellow, we see that over half of Generation K, so those that were born who are around age sort of 19 to 20, or 16 to 22 at the moment, over half of them feel that the fact that it offers a service that's personalised to them is an important driver, as is personal recommendations from friends, which makes a lot of sense, because when you think about how people move through life stage, younger people are often less confident with their purchase decisions, often more likely to refer to friends when they're deciding to buy something or like something, because their personal identity hasn't necessarily been set. Often your personal identity often sets in late adolescence, or recognition of your own personal identity. So that does fit with some of the scientific evidence that exists out there. And it's interesting when you look at older generations and what really drives them. So for older generations who are more confident in their purchase choices, who perhaps know their own minds better, are more likely to agree that the biggest drivers for them are the fact that it offers the best value for money. So it's curious, isn't it? It really varies across ages. Not only does the notion of trust change, but also so do the drivers of loyalty change across the generations. And we've articulated this neatly on a nice simple matrix for you to get your head around. So Gen K's, having looked at the research in a macro view, tend to be more driven by experiential benefits. So it's personalized, it's fun, it offers me something that is memorable to me, more kind of more I can remember, sticks in the kind of episodic memory perhaps. Millennials, it's more about finding that affinity. So it's more like me, it represents my values, which is interesting that affinity actually was more important to millennials than it was Generation K's. For Gen X's, they place a much greater emphasis on ease of use and quality. So that it just works, to want something that works. I know my mind, I know my own choices. Let's just have something that I know is going to deliver on its promise. And for older generations, it's all about service benefits. Give me what I expect. Don't mess around. And it's less of a, should we say, a kind of visceral emotive component there, as it would be for younger generations. So it's interesting to see the differences between the groups. Any thoughts at this point as we're going through? I'm just going to refer. I've had quite a few questions come in, so I'm just going to quickly refer to any of them, if any are relevant to that previous section. There's a few questions that have come in from the first section, so I'll do my best to go through those as we get to the end of the webinar. So moving on to the next section. So we've had a look at, just to kind of recap where we've been. We've looked at the importance of loyalty. We've looked at what drives loyalty for customers. We've understood how customers define loyalty in their own terms. But what does this mean for some of the best known loyalty schemes that exist on the high street? So how are some of the most common loyalty schemes performing? And so we used our own measurement model, so our RXI framework. So this is our own loyalty experience index, where we look across different brands. So you look at your own brand within your own category, and we analyze how you're currently performing on notions of loyalty. So it can be referenced to the scheme itself, it can be referenced to the brand and the components of loyalty and what drives people to be loyal to you in the first place, but it gives a sense of how you can kind of dial up and play with the narrative to try and entice people, to retain a relationship with you and to keep their customer over time. So we typically look at metrics of brand trust, customer experience, and customer attitude, because these are three of the most important components when it comes to defining a long-term lasting relationship between the customer and the brand. So we looked at some of the better known loyalty schemes on the high street. You might be members of some of these. You might be members of all of them, which would be pretty insane if you were. I imagine you need a pretty big wallet for that, wouldn't you? So we looked at some of the usual suspects: Costa, John Lewis, Superdrug, British Airways, Tesco's, Starbucks, blah blah blah. And we analysed their performance with our RXI framework. So we wanted to understand how they're performing in the customer's mind on loyalty. So how are they performing as an experience? Do they perform in line with the benchmark, above the benchmark, or below the benchmark? So I'm going to open up to a poll again, see if we can get a high completion on this one. I'm going to launch a poll. Which of these brands do you think performed best? And I've only able to put 5, unfortunately, because of the technology. But hopefully you should be able to give us a vote. When half of you have answered so far. I'm just going to give it another 10 seconds. So which loyalty scheme performed best? Was it Costa Coffee Club, My Starbucks Rewards, Amazon Prime, M&S Sparks, or a Superdrug Beauty Card, which I don't have in my pocket? I'm not sure if it's necessarily, well, it might be relevant for my demographic, maybe not. Anyway, close the polls. So results are in, and here are the scores. Oh, bit of a mix there. So Amazon Prime and Starbucks come out top, followed by Costa, M&S Sparks, and Superdrug fall by the wayside as Amazon Prime and Starbucks come running up the track. Cool. So I'm going to hide the results and move through. So if you got the answer right, give yourself a pat on the back, have the afternoon off, go outside, enjoy the sunshine with a lollipop. Your boss has just approved it, not a problem. I don't encourage that, it's not true. So I'm just going to move through, show you the scores. So top performers then, Starbucks Award came out top and Amazon Prime, so well done to those of you who voted that one. It's all obviously a bit of potluck, isn't it? You probably just pick the brand you're most favourable towards. M&S, Superdrug and Boots performed in line with the benchmark, and then the worst offenders down the bottom. I jest. There are, of course, we've measured this against our own framework, and we limited it to just 4 metrics, just to keep it quick and easy for the purpose of the exercise. But it does go to show on the next slide where the gaps in performance are, and where some of these brands need to really think about how they can deliver their experience to customers in a way that customers identify with better. So hopefully you can see this. It's quite detailed, but these are 4 of the metrics, as I mentioned, that we use to define to build out the measurement framework for this particular study. So those that perform best, so Starbucks and Amazon Prime, as you can see, really perform well on the personalization piece. So that's, you can see my cursor there, so that's the third column along. So all the green dots refer to where they perform above the benchmark, orange dots where they perform in line with that benchmark on that particular metric, and the red ones are where they perform under. So the brands that are winning overall are really winning on personalization and sales experience. That's really where the success stories rely. And what is interesting is that those that don't perform particularly well, when you have a look at it, they all kind of struggle on some of these really important aspects for consumers when we think about loyalty, so that it delivers on its promise. And you remember from earlier on that the delivering on its promise and brand likability were two of the most important drivers to loyalty for consumers. So there's obviously an area there that needs a bit of focus. So, does that proposition stick, and is that proposition consistent across all the touch points that you put out to consumers? It's interesting to see that. I'm not sure if any of you will that kind of fit with any of your own kind of thoughts. You can perform this, yeah. So the question just on the RXI framework, yeah, you can perform it against your own company. You can view it against competitors if you see, put it in your own market. Very much depends how you want to, what's important to you, I suppose, and what the question is that we're seeking to answer. All right, cool. So I'll move on just in the interest of time, because we've got sort of 10 minutes or so left, and I want to leave a bit of time for Q&A. It's been wonderful to have so many questions come through, and I'll do my best to answer them when we get to that point. So let's wrap it up. So, what does this really mean for marketers then? So if we've understood that loyalty is important, that perhaps our definition of loyalty isn't necessarily always in line with the definitions that customers have. And from a customer's perspective, the reasons why they are driven towards a particular brand, product, or service is very much driven by more emotive components. What do we need to consider? So this is our own framework in terms of how we view loyalty, and you've probably seen, many of you work in strategy roles, probably seen many different frameworks when defining customer loyalty. But we see it very much in terms of implicit components and explicit components. So what do I mean by that? The explicit components of loyalty and why you feel the way you do towards something is very much bound upon these aspects that you perhaps feel, you identify, but maybe don't necessarily have the language for. So shared values. So I believe in Volkswagen for safety. I believe in the values of Apple for doing things differently. I believe in the values of Monmouth Coffee for having a product that tastes great every time. The perceived quality bit is again that element where you can rely upon something and it delivers a consistent experience. And brand trust is something that's really created by these two elements, where if it's something where I share those values and I can expect the same service each time, I will over time develop that trust, which creates the positive attitude. And with positive attitude, again, you might be thinking of your own funnels, you might be thinking of other frameworks you might have used, but positive attitudes, if nurtured in the right way, with the right mechanisms in place, create that behavior. And in the explicit component are often the added value aspects. So it's the loyalty schemes, it's the vouchers, the coupons, the quick customer service. It's the aspects of loyalty that you're able to see and attenuate in language that you can explicitly understand. Often I think we spend quite a lot of time in the right-hand side. So it's a bit like Pavlov's dog, push button, get biscuit. We focus quite a lot in there when we talk about loyalty. But when we start to talk about the implicit elements of loyalty, often I feel marketers, again, do kind of struggle with this because it's quite a hard question to really get your head around. But research does show that these aspects from a consumer's point of view are most important when we consider brand loyalty and what makes them most loyal to a brand, product, or service. So I'm going to give you a couple of really great examples that have been in the market recently. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Oscar. So it's a health insurance provider in the States, and it's awesome the way this works. It's interesting how they play with personal data. So they are providing a health insurance product that uses Fitbit technology and quantified Internet of Things technology that enable the insurance and the consumer to set and its customer, set a personalized plan. So the premium you pay for your insurance through Oscar modifies according to whether or not you're a good person, whether or not you go along with your tailored health plan, and whether or not you keep active and fit. And what's really great about this, it incentivizes that behavior for people, that, you know, if you do your exercise and you look after yourself and keep well, then your premiums reduce as a result, because, you know, logic would have it, of course, and science would have it, that you're more likely to kind of live longer and have less health issues. So there's a benefits for both sides. So the shared values within this are that, you know, people want a fair deal for insurance, but they also, you know, they want to be healthy, want to lead better lives. No one really wants to have health issues as they get older. The quality is that of the quality aspect here, thinking about the framework that we've just seen, is that it incentivizes you to take care of yourself. By default, it incentivizes a better quality of life, because you're taking care of yourself. And the trust is that transparency of the data that you see between Oscar and the customer. So it's the transparency of the data I've done, whether I've kept to my plan. If I'm good, therefore you reward me with incentives and benefits. And then the explicit drivers of loyalty within this are, of course, the fact that you have a tracking device that monitors that behavior, so you can kind of see your performance in real time. So with monthly updates and communications from Oscar, the service, both aspects of implicit and explicit loyalty drivers are very much in play with this particular product, which I think is interesting given the context to that sector. You know, we typically think about insurance as being very much a locked-in, reasonably unsexy category itself, but the way that these guys have reimagined it, I think, is quite unique and quite different. And hopefully other brands in different categories will take heed to what they're doing. Another really great example, I think this is awesome. This is Red Tomato Pizza, who are based over in Dubai, and it's really interesting mechanism where you can go online, set your preferred pizza preference, and with a press of a button that stays on your fridge, connect to Wi-Fi, you can order a pizza just with a flick of the button. So it plays into this. Think about those implicit drivers, and it plays into those shared values. Well, people are habitual with their food purchases. So if you think about your own weekly shop, you're probably buying the same types of products and same types of foods. It plays into that idea that we are quite habitual with our behaviors when it comes down to food. So why go online or call away? You can just simply press a button and chill out and get on with your evening. It's quality in the fact that because they store your preference data, they're able to keep to quicker delivery times than any other provider in their local area. And you can trust it because they, again, have mechanisms in the back end there, and use the right customer experience data to validate and show how they're performing, whether they're keeping on track, and allows you, much like if you were to donate on Just Giving or whatever it is, what the status of your order is. And obviously it's an extremely addictive mechanism. I think it'd be brilliant to have a pizza button on the fridge. I'm not sure if I'll get in trouble at home, but I think that'd be genius. So hopefully that sort of brought to life some examples of how we can start to think about implicit and explicit drivers of loyalty. So to wrap up the session, so I'm again mindful of time, so it'd be great to have a bit of Q&A at the end. We've covered quite a lot of ground. Of course, we've understood why loyalty is important, particularly in the current socio-economic climate. Customer research is going to be vital at this point to really understand what drives people, what their hopes and dreams are, and whether, you know, what their aspirations are going to be in the next sort of 10 to 15 years, given recent news in the UK and how the media is certainly playing hype to that. We've understood that perhaps our definition of loyalty in the marketing industry is a little bit different to how customers see it, that we need to perhaps think about it more in terms of the emotive tones, more of the emotive drivers that we don't often spend enough time thinking about. We've also had a discussion around why those key drivers of loyalty really are. And again, brand likability, trust, consistency, and also convenience metrics are vitally important, but these change throughout our life stage. So the reason why you love something when you're 15 will be very different as you move through, because as you get older, your needs change, but also your attitudes and experiences alter as well. So there is no one-size-fits-all approach to understanding the notion of trust. It develops as we get older, and it's important, if you really want to understand what drives customer loyalty for your business, it's really important to understand some of these aspects before you invest heavily in whole-scale systems, architectures, or ways of working that perhaps aren't necessarily getting to the nub of what true loyalty is. and how you should measure that in the right way. So in summary, we've understood that perhaps some of these current loyalty schemes you see on the high street aren't necessarily driving loyalty, but it's not a functional thing. We've got to think about it more over time in more emotive language, and how trust is vitally important with that. So I'm just going to throw it open to a Q&A. I've had a few questions through, so I'm just going to go to some of the questions that we've seen. So one question which came through earlier was, do you think we focus too much on digital in our search to drive loyalty? I think so. I think certainly a lot of clients that we work with get quite obsessed with the shiny and new apps or the shiny new ways of doing things, but haven't necessarily understood, well, hang on a minute, why would you do that? What is the real driver of loyalty for your business? Why do people buy from you in the first place? So I think we certainly do get quite excited about questions like that. Going to pick some of the shorter ones that have come through. There have been some really great questions that have come out, but I'm mindful of sort of time. As they come through. So there's a question about the RXI framework. So as I mentioned, it's based on we can look across different categories and different brands and look at brands individually. So that's there. So there's a question here from Toby. So I think this is related to, I'm just going through your message, Toby, just to make sure I've got it right. But I think there's a question here around the how customers define loyalty. So that question was asked to the full 1,071. So 1 in 5 people, the top chosen term used was trust. So 1 in 5 people used trust. That was the top chosen or top articulated term that customers use when they talk about brand loyalty. Cool. So I'm mindful of time. So another one here, just any tips for online retailers to produce emotive and brand loyalty campaigns? Well, it's an interesting one. Just the notion of, by default, the question of online retailers just kind of shoot the experience that's being created here into a channel rather than necessarily what that brand message is. So I guess in that context, it's kind of going back to what are the shared values between yourself and your key audiences. How do you bring that to life? So how's that delivered on? What's that proposition that you create, and how do you create added value to it? So it's very much thinking about that particular question. From there, you can very much think about the implicit elements and the explicit elements as well, to producing some of that more emotive feeling. Because obviously with online retail, depending on the category, you could be providing products and services that really help people express themselves or create better home environments. That are really important, aren't they, when you think about it? I've recently just bought a load of wood from B&Q to build some shelves. It's made my home feel much better. But when you think about that, B&Q, when you go there, it's just about getting reasonably priced product in an accessible manner. But actually, the experience that it's created in the home is much improved. So the brand's really added value there. So I'm just going to move through rather than sort of going through the questions. Those of you who have asked, I haven't been able to have time to address. I'll send up some follow-on emails to you if that's all right, because it's good to sort of continue the discussion. So where we're going next. So the research was published in Marketing Week last week. It's been picked up. So if you've got Marketing Week in the office, you can see the data there. There's a nicely written report, loads of interesting quotes from various pods in the industry. So you can digest that at your own time. Then later in the summer, we are publishing our work on demystifying the truths about millennials. So you see a lot of things written about them, but as you can see from this webinar, some of those truths are perhaps not necessarily the case. As some of that data show with the notion of trust does change over time. So there are some aspects of us as human beings at this particular age that are that do remain consistent over time, and some things that obviously will vary according to the kind of social context that we find ourselves in. So we're going to hopefully demystify some of those aspects when we've come out of field, and we'll share with you if it's of course of interest. So any questions, of course, you can find me on the internet. I'm there somewhere. Please feel free to give me a shout if you'd like to have a copy of the research, or you'd like to have a copy of this webinar. Then we can obviously send that through to you on email. But thanks for being an awesome audience, and firing off loads of questions. I'll do my best to answer those on email later this afternoon or tomorrow. But enjoy your rest of your afternoon. Don't get too hot. Drink loads of water. If you get time to go to a pub, go to a beer garden, have a nice cold pint of beer, but make sure you drink a lot of water as well, because you'll get dehydrated. Thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.